Welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Mate. And Katie, this is a special week. This is a special week, I believe. I believe this is the week we celebrated your birthday.
We celebrate. We continue. Yes.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. It's been a great one. You know what I did for it?
No.
You didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
I had omakase. Have you ever had omakase sushi?
No, I don't think so.
So it's when they give you one piece of sushi at a time and you have no control over what they bring you. And I went with my friend for his birthday, and I was a little bit afraid that I wasn't going to like it because I don't know what you're into in terms of sushi, but I kind of like really boring stuff like California roll and like tempura roll. I'm not proud of it, but I'm just being real with what I usually like. So I expected that given that you have no choice about what you eat and they just give you one piece after another, there's going to be a lot of raw fish. I expected I really wouldn't like it, but I actually loved it. And so then I did it for my birthday. And Wilson, I just texted you something. Let's go to the videotape. I texted you an image of what they got me because I told them at the restaurant it was my birthday. And lots of places, they may give you, at other places, like a slice of cake maybe, some ice cream for your birthday, but not at this place. Look at that.
Beautiful. Wow.
Beautiful, right? They made, for the people just listening, it's like a rose that they made out of salmon, and then some other little flowers of tuna and a whitefish, and then they put a candle in a little thing of wasabi. It's very pretty.
Who knew that raw fish could make such a nice floral arrangement?
I know.
Stunning.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I did. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad it was a good one, and I'm glad you got to celebrate with honestly one of the nicest fish bouquets. In fact, the nicest fish bouquet I've ever seen.
Top 5. Yeah. Let's be brutally honest. At least top 5. Yeah.
I went to a sushi place recently in LA, and on the back of the menu, they were like, "No, we do not serve California rolls. No, we do not serve avocado. We serve sushi our way. If you don't like it, you can leave." Like they were,
Yes, and really. That's a place I would have thought I would have had to have left. But thanks to this omakase experience, I now know that I'm actually much more adventurous sushi eater than I realized.
Absolutely. And this place I went to, which was so stringent, was delicious. So I put my full faith in any sushi restaurant that will deny me anything that I might otherwise want. So
yeah. Well, thanks for the birthday wishes, everyone.
Well, we're going to keep the party going with a fun-filled episode of Useful Idiots. Our guest today is going to be Larry Johnson. He is a former CIA analyst, and we're going to speak to him about the latest in the proxy war in Ukraine, including this NATO summit in Lithuania, where some tension between Zelensky and his patrons emerged. So we'll be discussing that and a lot more. And as always, you can go to usefulidiots.substack.com or usefulidiots.locals.com to subscribe and get bonus content, including an extended interview with Larry Johnson, our guest today.
And our weekly feature, Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to our 4 basic food groups. Democrats suck. Republicans suck. Isn't that weird? Isn't that terrible? I have Democrats suck. And for that, we're going to go to AOC.
So president's only primary opponents are Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Haven't been any rumors about anyone else even thinking about jumping in. Will you be supporting Joe Biden for re-election?
I believe given that field, yes. I think he's done quite well, given the limitations that we have. I do think that there are ebbs and flows, as there are in any presidency. There are areas that I think were quite strong when he came right out of the gate with the American Rescue Plan. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act was a massive step in terms of our climate agenda. But, there are also areas that I think could have gone better. We have major structural issues in this country, and I think it starts with the United States Senate. And I think that until we have senators that are willing to stand up and stare the filibuster in the eye and stare a lot of structural issues about the Senate, and the United States Senate will be what holds back this country from an enormous amount of progress.
Yes, and of course she did this. She made this announcement on Pod Save America, speaking with Jon Favreau. And of course, we spoke about Jon Favreau vote shaming on last week's episode.
All right, it's so redundant at this point, I think, to like criticize AOC from the left that I can't even do it anymore. Obviously, just re-endorsing Joe Biden, I think, speaks for itself. Like, so many betrayals on core issues to progressives, like when he broke the railroad workers strike, all the ways in which he could have fought for progressive agenda items but didn't. And then, of course, the proxy war in Ukraine, which to me is right there, irrespective of everything else, is a cancelable policy. But I do want to go back to the beginning, because what I find funny, I think more thought and deliberation went into Jon Favreau's T-shirt choice than into AOC's endorsement of Joe Biden. So let's go back. I just want to, like, can we just go back to the beginning of the clip? Yeah. I guarantee you that there is, and I say this as a guy who,
a gray shirt wearing guy, a GSW,
I wear gray shirts too.
A GSG, you're wearing a gray shirt right now. Yeah.
But I just think he throws on a T-shirt like that, I think, to look as if he's like casual and doesn't care. He's like, I'm like a casual guy just hosting this podcast and getting progressives to endorse Joe Biden well before the primaries even really started. I guarantee you, the more thought went into that T-shirt than into AOC's decision here. I don't know, for some reason, that makes me never want to wear a T-shirt ever again. Because I think, like, their whole thing is to give this, like, young sheen on a old neoliberal party, right, that no matter what they do, we're always told we have to vote for them. And here is AOC, who was supposed to be this revolutionary figure, falling in line now without even asking for anything.
What's the point?
Yeah, what's the point? And all these other progressive candidates who are in the race, like Cornel West, who's in the race, who I think is publicly identified with a lot more of AOC's professed values than Joe Biden is. So
yeah, well, or Marianne Williamson. I mean, the thing is that Marianne Williamson, we've talked about this, Aaron. Like, I really like her domestic stuff. I think it's the best. I mean, I think she and Cornel West have very good domestic programs. I disagree with her on Ukraine. But the thing is, like, AOC agrees with her on Ukraine. So she actually should have no reservations about endorsing Marianne Williamson. But of course she won't.
So thumbs down to...
It ebbs and flows, though, Aaron. It ebbs and flows. As AOC says. And there's structural issues. Such a word salad.
And, I got to say, too, like, not that I care. I don't need to talk to the squad. It's it's doesn't matter. But it's so funny to me that, like, these progressive members of Congress never go on progressive YouTube shows. Like, I wouldn't expect them to talk to me because, like, I'm very critical of them for all their stances, especially on Ukraine. But there are shows that are actually even friendlier to them, or at least not as harsh, and they won't even talk to them either. Yet they only go now on these, like, centrist neoliberal shows, like the shows that are associated with the wing of the party that is tried to destroy and then co-opt them. And, like, going on shows like Pod Save America and ignoring, like, lefty YouTube shows, to me, that's, like, just a signal the squad accepts being co-opted. And I don't know. It's a disappointment.
So for Republican Suck, we have something very interesting happening, and it has to do with Barbie, of all things. Let's go to the videotape. Fox News.
Hollywood facing backlash over its ties to China. Senator Ted Cruz accusing the new Barbie movie of pushing CCP propaganda and groveling to the communist regime. His criticism coming after Vietnam banned the movie over scenes with a map showing China's claims to the territory in the South China Sea, the so-called 9-dash line. So, Joe, is Barbie a communist?
Maybe.
Like
Hollywood.
Okay, that would be funny and cute if it were tongue-in-cheek, but it's kind of not tongue-in-cheek because there are Republicans who actually are talking about this. Ted Cruz tweeted about it. He's not the only one. We also have Rep. Mike Gallagher, who leads a select House panel, which is aimed at countering the influence of China. He said of the map in the movie that it illustrates the pressure that Hollywood is under to please CCP censors. And let's take a look at this map of Barbie standing in front of this map. This is the map that they are accusing China of spreading its propaganda through. Okay, this map. This is propaganda that is trying to convince the world that China has the rights to the South China Sea. You see that dotted line coming out of there? That is the 9-dash line by which China lays claim to nearly all of the South China Sea as its own territory. So Vietnam, over that dash, has banned the film in Vietnam. But what's interesting is that what's really happening is that Ted Cruz and all these Republicans who are upset about this are aligning themselves with communist Vietnam.
That is really funny. I wonder what's next. Are they going to start checking, children's school drawings to make sure that they don't recognize China's sovereignty over anywhere that we don't recognize? I mean, let's not stop at Barbie. Let's make sure that our schools are safe from communist propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, there is kind of a feminist critique of Barbie, right?
Oh, sure, obviously. Right, yeah.
So here are Republicans maybe, aligning with their feminist sisters to stand up to the patriarchy.
It could be that, yeah. They should need to join hands, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it is funny though that they of course Senator Cruz's spokesperson said he's been fighting for years to prevent American companies, especially Hollywood studios, from altering and censoring their content to appease the Chinese Communist Party. But he, of course, Cruz is just appeasing the Vietnamese Communist Party because he is a fan of Ho Chi Minh and his vision, not the Chinese one.
You're getting from this that Ted Cruz loves Ho Chi Minh. Okay.
Exactly. All right.
All right.
Yeah. Because he's siding with that communist country. Yep.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Isn't that weird? When you hear the name George Santos, do you ever think of Rosa Parks as being a fair analog with him?
I mean, all the time. I confuse them all the time. Yeah.
Well, you're unlucky because someone who agrees with you is George Santos. Listen to this.
They come for me, I go right back for them because I think for far too long they've gotten away with getting along to get along. So no, it's not going to stay that way anymore. I'm going to call them out. You want to call me a liar? I'll call you a sellout. I mean, Mitt Romney, the man goes to the State of the Union of the United States wearing a Ukraine lapel pin, tells me, a Latino gay man, that I shouldn't sit in the front, that I should be in the back. Well, guess what? Rosa Parks didn't sit in the back, and neither am I going to sit in the back. That's just the reality of how it works. Mitt Romney lives in a very different world, and he needs to buckle up because it's going to be a bumpy ride for him.
Wow. I mean, I like the mixed metaphor. He needs to buckle up because it's going to be a bumpy bus ride for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If we're going to,
I bet Rosa Parks didn't use that metaphor when she refused to sit in the back of the bus.
I mean, she was brave, but not George Santos brave.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. I got to say, but in seriousness, I do appreciate that he's giving, he's bringing the heat to Mitt Romney, who is just a complete neocon, and he deserves all the scorn that he gets. But yes, I would not be choosing Rosa Parks as my analog if I were George Santos. I mean, Rosa Parks fought for desegregation, fought against racism. George Santos is standing up for what? The right of serial liars to serve in Congress, which is, fair. Yeah, I support that right, but not quite on the level of Rosa Parks.
Right. You could just do it without the Rosa Parks comparison. Yeah. I mean, you could have gone with Anne Frank. That would have worked too. Even better. Yeah. All righty. Well, Isn't That Terrible? Let's hear this haunting story.
From New York has been arrested after police say he attacked another man and ran through 2 Las Vegas strip casinos. We have blurred it out for obvious reasons, but police say that is Brian Danilchik.
Brian Danilchik, 35, was accused of slugging a one-legged man before going on his naked dance rampage, which his family says was so out of character that they believe it was caused by some type of hallucinogenic drug that was slipped into his drink. He is the victim, his wife told the Post, and the person who chose to drug my husband is the true criminal. The reason I chose this as an Isn't That Terrible is because it's kind of a double terrible. You have this man exposing himself, acting in offensive ways, going after a one-legged man. And then on top of that, according to his family, he's the real victim because he was roofied.
I think it's a triple terrible because it's also giving hallucinogenic drugs a bad name.
Yeah, and, that's true.
I have to wonder if this is some sort of setup. This is my deep state conspiracy theory here. This could be a propaganda, a psyop by Big Pharma.
Big Pharma. Yeah, you're right, actually.
To taint the good name of hallucinogenic plant medicine by saying that it caused this innocent man to slug another man and run naked through a casino. I don't know. Yeah, that's my conspiracy theory.
I think that you may be onto something, which is why this is actually such an important Isn't That Terrible? Because isn't that terrible, and isn't that an important moment to realize and get into action against Big Pharma.
Yeah, and isn't that a conspiracy theory? For this week's guest, we are joined by Larry Johnson. He is a former CIA analyst who also served as the deputy director at the U.S. State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. And we're going to speak to Larry about the latest in the proxy war in Ukraine. Larry Johnson, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you guys.
I want to start with the NATO summit where Ukraine was calling for a roadmap to admission, and they got denied. In fact, the statement that came out from NATO is very vague. It just says that we'll admit Ukraine when conditions are met, but doesn't even specify what those conditions are. And there's a photo circulating that I want to go to show people. This, I think, captures the outcome for Ukraine at this summit. This is Zelensky standing alone amid a sea of NATO leaders all speaking to each other. There it is. That's the image that I think says it all. What's your take on this summit and Ukraine not receiving what it was hoping for, which is just even a promise of a timeline to admission?
Well, I like the variation on that photo. I don't know if you've seen it. They take if you go to like a theme park, Disney World, you have to be this tall to ride this ride. So it says you have to be this tall to join NATO, and it shows him as being short. So
he came up short. Your fellow short king.
Yeah, I know. Hey, I can laugh at that with reluctance, but yeah.
So, when Biden said the other day, in a moment of clarity, a rare moment of clarity, that number one, the United States has run out of missiles or rockets, ammunition to send Ukraine, which is why we're now going to send cluster munitions because we don't have anything else left in the cupboard. And he's not going to let Ukraine join NATO as long as the war is going on, because if they did that, then they'd have to enact Article 5 and we'd be at war with Russia. And neither the United States nor Germany, they're on the record, they don't want that. So there is no path forward for Ukraine because they've laid it to the condition, well, when you beat Russia in the war, that's not happening. It's not going to happen. So, take that off the table. Ukraine will never be in NATO. That's the bottom line.
I'm just curious, would it be possible? I mean, if the world decided that they wanted to go in and defend Ukraine, what would even happen if they provided them with enough weaponry to be able to defeat Russia? Is that even a potential does that exist, even that possibility?
Well, we've watched the evolution of NATO United States strategy over the last 16 months. Since the special military operation started. They started with the initial assumption that the Russian army was terrible, that it's weak, that the defense industry in Russia was non-existent or decrepit, and that the West could just through supplying money and munitions would put Ukraine on the road to victory. Because the fact of the matter was, in terms of the size of the army at the outbreak of the special military operation, Ukraine had the largest military in the European theater, with the exception of Turkey, who's not considered Europe. It wants to be, but is not yet considered. So they thought that they could do the proxy war thing. And yet, at every step along the way, they are refusing to deal with the reality. You go back and look at the reports starting end of March of 2022. Russia is running out of missiles. Russia's rockets they're down to their last week. They're almost done, and and that report would come out like every 2 weeks. And so here we are in June, and Russia is still pummeling Ukraine with cruise missiles, with glide bombs, with artillery shells, and so. Then they kept crossing the red line of, you have Biden on the record, we'll never send tanks. Oh, we're going to send tanks. We'll never send the F-16. We're going to send the F-16. So everything that said that they wouldn't do, they've done. And it's for a meaningless effect because the West does not have a weapon system in place that is superior to or can defeat Russian air defense systems, as an example. The Patriot missile. Oh, there was the game changer. How'd that turn out? Well, the Russians blew it up. And the fact of the matter is, we knew in advance that the Patriot system is a turkey. Just ask the Saudis. They couldn't stop Houthi crude missiles from coming in. And I mean crude, not cruise. There is really nothing left in the NATO cupboard. And what, they're going to load people up on trucks and drive them into Ukraine to be more cannon fodder? I don't see it. NATO has nothing in its technological kit bag aside from using nuclear weapons that could do anything to change the outcome of this war in Ukraine.
So Britain has sent the Storm Shadow missiles.
Mhm.
France just announced a new round of missiles for Ukraine. And now the U.S. is still debating sending ATACMS to Ukraine, which Ukraine has long coveted. You're saying that none of these would make a difference?
No. I mean, Scott Ritter and I had a friendly disagreement a year ago that sending in the HIMARS was going to be a game changer. I said, it's not going to change anything. I mean, it may kill a few more people, but my idea of a game changer is something that completely alters the outcome. And the outcome here is predetermined. The ATACMS, some of those may hit inside of Russia, but it's not going to destroy Russia's industrial and military capability. Right now, Russia's the only country in the world that is self-sufficient in terms of being able to produce everything it needs without relying upon some other country to send it a rare earth mineral, for example. Russia has ample supplies of rare earth minerals, but also a technological superiority. And we keep forgetting the fact that Russia has been our Uber driver to the International Space Station for going on 20 years. It's just, and yet we continue to portray Russia and the Russian people as these backward, technologically unsophisticated souls. It's just a lie. So if they send ATACMS, they'll get shot dead. What it's going to do, if they send ATACMS or send F-16s, it's going to raise Russia's military response and risk the possibility that Russia will start striking outside of Ukraine. Because the F-16s do represent a potential nuclear threat because they can carry nuclear weapons. And Russia has been very direct with the West about that and made that a specific warning to them. So Russia's not going to sit back and risk the possibility of an F-16 taking off with a tactical nuke. They'll shoot it down, they'll destroy it before it gets off the ground. And if it's in the ground in Poland, so be it.
Looking at the squabbling that's been going on between Zelensky and his NATO patrons, it's been reported now in the New York Times, the Washington Post, that U.S. officials were infuriated with Zelensky for criticizing them over their vague final statement about Ukraine's NATO prospects. I'm just wondering, do you think NATO ever intended to let Ukraine into the alliance, or has the pledge of future membership just been used to basically de facto integrate Ukraine into NATO, basically giving NATO a backdoor into Ukraine without ever taking on the responsibility of having to defend Ukraine against Russia?
Ukraine has always been a proxy throughout this entire affair. The ultimate target's Russia, and dismantling Russia, taking it apart so that the West can exploit Russians' natural resources. Its vast quantities of gold, oil, gas, uranium, nickel, aluminum. I mean, you just go down the list. Russia is sitting literally on a veritable gold mine, but not just gold alone, as both sort of a breadbasket of Europe. To that end, Ukraine was seen as a proxy to pull Russia into a fight that the West foolishly believed that it could win. Part of the problem there is that the United States has been engaged with all these foreign military adventures for the last 60 years now, going back to Vietnam, and none of them have turned out well. They've all been, frankly, disastrous in one form or another, other than keeping the defense industry well lubricated. They over the last 9 years since the Maidan, every year NATO and the European Command of the United States Army were conducting regular full-scale military exercises with Ukraine. So even though Ukraine was not a de jure member of NATO, it was a de facto member in terms of its forces were trained with to integrate with NATO personnel. And the reality was Ukraine had a stronger army than France and than the United Kingdom's got 75,000 total troops. Ukraine was at the start of the war close to 900,000. And yet it's the British are going to train the Ukrainians. I mean, it's ridiculous. These guys live in a land of delusion and fantasy. And I'm talking about the Germans, the French, the Brits. One of the few guys in Europe is Orban of Hungary. He actually has a pretty good grasp on reality and realizes it's going nowhere. So I think right now you're looking at NATO is in a panic, a quiet panic. They're not running around the room screaming, but inside they are, because everything they've played in Ukraine has failed. And they fully expected Ukraine to have punched through the Russian defenses and be, waiting in the Azov Sea right now. And that didn't happen.
Why do you think the counteroffensive has failed so badly? There was so much hype around this counteroffensive. Ukraine was going to retake all this territory. So what has happened on the ground that's made it so difficult for Ukraine?
Well, they didn't have what you need for a successful offensive. Number one, the Ukrainians are now outnumbered in manpower. So Russia had more personnel on those defensive lines than Ukraine could muster. Number two, the people that Ukraine was throwing forward in this offensive were not properly trained. They had some training, but if a soldier to be effective in this kind of environment would need at least a year to 18 months of training to be even marginally efficient in combat. I mean, think about the HBO series Band of Brothers. You look at that group of paratroopers who were trained. They went through almost 2 years of training before they were thrown into combat. And even then, they had trouble coping with the situation. That wasn't just a Hollywood story or movie. That's real life. That's portraying it as it really is. But then they also had the equipment problem. They didn't have fixed-wing combat aircraft that could come up and provide what's called close air support. That means planes will fly up close to behind where the troops are, and they can drop bombs on the Russian position or fire missiles. There was a movie out with Mel Gibson, We Were Soldiers, and it showed all these soldiers that were trapped in Vietnam. They're surrounded by a Vietnamese army, and they kept having to call air cover in to drop bombs on the attacking Vietnamese. Well, that's what you need, something like that. You need some helicopters, and you need what's called mobile artillery. So if you're moving forward in an advancing line, that artillery is coming behind you, because if the artillery stays in a fixed place and you keep moving forward, at some point you're going to come to a geographic location where your own artillery is going to hit you and kill you. And then it'd be nice to have some mobile air defense that can move along with you and intercept anything that the Russians are firing back at you. Ukraine had none of that. They had some tanks and some armored vehicles, and the Russians had created these massive minefields. And as Ukraine got into it, it was destroying all this equipment right and left. They didn't have to use an anti-tank guided missile to blow up a lot of this stuff. The mines themselves were doing it. So for all of those reasons, I could have predicted at the outset. Oh, I did predict at the outset. This is going to be a bust. And it has been.
Jake Sullivan has said that, quote, Ukraine has provided written assurances, end quote, that they will use our cluster bombs, quote, in a very careful way, end quote. He also says U.S. clusters have a low dud rate compared to Russia. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's nonsense. Number one, the Ukrainians have been shelling and killing civilians wantonly for the last 9 years. So now all of a sudden they're going to be careful about not causing civilian casualties. I mean, come on. That's just a flat out lie. Reflects ignorance. And Sullivan's not ignorant. I put him more in the liar category. So the dud rate, these things have been sitting around in a warehouse, and the odds are the dud rate's going to be much higher. What that means is when all these little bomblets that look like small baseballs go flying all over the place, they're not going to explode until 2 or 3 years later when a kid picks them up and it blows off their arm, leg, or hand.
Yeah, we even had we went over this. We react to Sunday morning news shows. We do a segment called Monday Morning where we react to the Sunday morning news shows we watch so that you don't have to. And one of them was Face the Nation, and Margaret Brennan is talking to a Ukrainian ambassador and says, surely you guys aren't going to use them against civilians, right? And the ambassador says, oh, of course not. You know, as if they've already not done that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like unbelievable. I didn't know if it was an ignorance or dishonesty thing.
Yeah. No, you should have said, no, we just use the HIMARS and the M777s on civilians. No, we're not going to use the cluster bombs. We prefer the bigger stuff to make sure we kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you talk about what these cluster bombs are? I heard you talk about this on another show, and I think it's important for people to realize how they function.
Yeah, so my understanding is the initial development of these was for the war in Vietnam, to be able to penetrate the jungle, and that you will pack in, what's a good way? Think of a box of golf balls, only bigger, and you got 4 dozen golf balls packed in a container. When that container comes apart, those golf balls fly out and land, and they're supposed to explode. But the dud rate means they hit the ground and they don't explode, or they fall into water and the impact's not enough to generate the detonation. And so then it hangs around for years, and then you find kids, civilians walking through a field and see something round. Hey, what's this? Boom, and it goes off. So it was banned, or they've tried to ban it as a kind of weapon that is more harmful to civilians than to troops. And this is a sign of the desperate state that Ukraine is in and the desperate state the United States is in. We don't have any alternative to send them right now, short of nuclear weapons. And so far, thank God, they haven't decided that that's a good idea.
But meanwhile, when Biden speaks, he's speaking as if it's Russia that is on the ropes. For example, go to a clip of him where he says that he doesn't think Russia can maintain this war.
The question of whether the war could go on for years, is there a possibility there's a stalemate and it can continue for quite some time?
Well, I don't think the war can go on for years for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't think that that Russia could maintain the war forever, number one, in terms of their resources and capacity. Number two, I think that there is going to be a circumstance where eventually President Putin is going to decide it's not in the interest of Russia, economically, politically, or otherwise, to continue this war. But I can't predict exactly how that happens. My hope is, and my expectation is, you'll see that Ukraine makes significant progress on their offensive, and that it generates a negotiated settlement somewhere along the line.
So he's saying there that he expects Ukraine to make enough progress on the battlefield that would compel Russia to then negotiate and accept an outcome that would be favorable to Ukraine.
So we don't have a single example since the start of the special military operation where Ukraine has actually gone up against an entrenched Russian force and driven it out of its position and forced it to retreat. What took place in Kharkiv last fall in September was Russia had a bunch of territorial defense units, police. They were not well supplied. They were not well armed. And once they realized they were up against a larger force, they withdrew from that territory. So it was not a hard-fought battle where the Ukrainians overwhelmed a Russian force. Same thing in Kherson, when the Russians abandoned that, I think that was November. It was because, think of New Orleans. If you've got all of your troops on the west side of the river and your supply lines on the other side of the river, are you going to count on being able to get across that river with supplies? No, that's why they pulled them back. So apart from that, there's not been a single example of Ukraine in this entire special military operation of being able to stop the Russians. You remember Mariupol back in May of 2022. At no point did Ukraine mount a rescue operation of tanks, aircraft, armored divisions moving forward to try to relieve their troops that were surrounded. Couldn't pull it off. And right now, what we've seen over the course of the last, so it started June 4th. Here we are coming up on July 14th. And in 6 weeks, Ukraine has not cracked even the first line of defense. Russia has erected trenches, dragon's teeth, minefields, ditches, a variety of anti-tank traps. Ukraine hasn't even gotten to the first of those. They just got to the minefields that were out in front. So their inability to crack that is, again, reflected on, they just don't have the offensive power. And yet we know that this is what NATO fully expected them to accomplish. David Petraeus, a retired general, was on television on June 6th because he had clearly been briefed on what the plan was. Boy, he was all optimistic, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and they're going to, march into they're going to be like Sherman going to the sea of, the Atlantic Ocean. Well, hasn't happened. And what it has resulted in is the Ukrainians are taking horrific casualties. And this is really sort of, I'm not sure who coined the term, Doug McGregor or Scott Ritter, but they talked about this is the third army now that Ukraine has raised to fight Russia. The first army existed at the start of the special military operation. That was degraded. It was replaced with new reinforcements and replacements. That's the second army that was involved with the Kharkiv offensive and going to Kherson, but ultimately losing in Bakhmut. Now you're on the third iteration. And each iteration is like if you keep making a copy of something, every generation of the succeeding copy becomes less quality, less clear, less integrity. And that's exactly what's happening to the Ukrainian military. They're in a death spiral, because by the death spiral I mean they can't recruit, train, and then keep those troops in training for a sufficient period, say a year, before they have to be committed to combat. It's just the opposite. They're being grabbed off the street, given a gun, maybe 3 weeks of training, and then boom, off to the front line. Well, they really are not in any condition to do anything of any consequence militarily. So that's why this counteroffensive has been a complete dud. Now they're going to run up against the fall and winter. So in Ukraine, we know from history, just ask the Germans and ask Napoleon, weather plays a huge impact. And once the rains start coming at the end of September, 1st of October, all of a sudden the roads and fields in Ukraine become impassable or virtually impassable. And it limits the kinds of military campaigns that can be conducted. So right now, Ukraine has left 2 weeks in July, 4 weeks in August, and 4 weeks in September. That's 8 weeks. And where are they going to get their magic army now? And they've already run out of munitions, and some of the munitions that are being promised them by the West aren't going to show up until December or January. I frankly don't know how Ukraine survives intact after September.
Well, so what do you think the Biden administration's strategy is, assuming they have one? Is it to try to delay this until after the 2024 presidential election?
I don't think they have a strategy other than what I've called the more cowbell. If you recall that Saturday Night Live skit with Christopher Walken, it would come out. The band was playing a Blue Oyster Cult song. And he said, "We need more cowbell. No matter what happened, we need more cowbell." That's been the Biden policy with respect to Ukraine. The cowbell, though, in this case is attack them, cluster munitions, F-16s. And then we're going to look around and go, what else do we got? Trying to put, what was going to be proven is once there's a part of me that wants the F-16 put into theater, just so it can get shot down and it can finally wake these morons up to the disaster they've created. Because the United States, through its military adventures over the last, especially the last 30 years, has built up this mythology about our mighty military capability. We are so great. As Donald Trump said, we've got the best military in the world. No, we don't. We've got the most expensive military in the world. But we have a military that is decked out with Lamborghini, the equivalent of Lamborghinis and Ferraris, but that, they don't work. Or the parts are so expensive you can barely operate them. And they're not tied into an integrated national security strategy. It's more like, we're going to a bar and see if we can pick a fight. And it's just what we're doing. Our strategy is designed more to keep the military industrial complex going. As long as we got a fresh enemy for them, they're happy, which is why we've seen this growth of the national defense budget from, what was it, in 1990, it was around $225 billion. Now it's approaching $850 billion, heading towards $1 trillion. And what do we have to show for it? We've found weapon systems that the Russians are regularly defeating on the battlefield in Kuwait. In Ukraine, excuse me.
This fantasy of standing with Ukraine and defeating Russia, what would that even look like? Then turn into a nuclear war? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to reach people who are not bad faith cynics, but actually feel empathy towards Ukrainians and feel we need to stand with Ukraine. And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiots.substack.com. Well, that was interesting.
It was. And, I think we should get ahead of some criticism of this segment because there is a big effort to try to silence people who dissent from the pro-proxy war line on Ukraine. And so what is done is anything that someone said in the past that can be used to discredit them is invoked. So just to get out in front of this, Larry Johnson, if you go to his Wikipedia page, and Wikipedia is notorious for all sorts of efforts to smear critics of the neocon agenda, basically. I know that from my own experience with my Wikipedia page. It says many things.
And not providing the full context.
And it says many things about Larry Johnson that, are obviously aimed at discrediting him. So it does point out that he said things that have turned out to be false. So, for example, he accused Michelle Obama of making some comments about Whitey in a tape. And he also falsely accused John Kerry of committing rape in Vietnam. And in both cases, Larry Johnson says he got it wrong and he apologized. And he says in the case of Michelle Obama, he actually fell for a scam that was propagated by the Clinton campaign initially. So that's his response there. And on John Kerry, he says that he basically fell for a doctored tape, which he's apologized for, which his Wikipedia page doesn't mention that he has actually retracted those statements. Right. But that's par for the course when you're dealing with critics of proxy wars. There's going to be any attempt made to ignore what they have to say now and instead try to bring up selectively things they've said in the past. So that's us getting out ahead of our critics. So sorry, we've taken away your ace in the hole. And we won't be deterred from interviewing people who happen to dissent from the party line because otherwise, what are we here for?
True that.
All right, usefulidiots.substack.com and usefulidiots.locals.com to support us and get bonus content.
Including the extended interview where we get into some really interesting stuff about Russiagate and Prigozhin and his disguises. And of course, you also get the Thursday Throwdown segment, which is where we react to media clips from the week.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All righty. Bye. Hello. Thank you so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For full episodes and extended interviews, please subscribe at usefulidiots.substack.com. You can subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/usefulidiots for clips, live streams, and full episodes. Also, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod and use the hashtag UsefulIdiotsPod. Join us Mondays at 10 a.m. for the Useful Idiots Monday Morning Show, where we discuss the Sunday morning news shows so you don't have to watch them.